I never thought my own mother would look me in the eyes and call me a failure. But there she was, standing in our family dining room, her voice cold as she announced that my childhood home would go to my brother Travis instead of being split between us. All because I wanted to follow my own path. She gave me 2 days to pack my things and leave. Just like that, I was homeless at 25, with only $5,000 in savings and a shattered heart. What happened 3 years later, though, no one could have predicted. Growing up in our spacious colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut, I never questioned that I was part of a successful family. My parents, Margaret and William Anderson, had built Anderson Construction from the ground up, transforming it from a small residential contractor into one of the most respected commercial builders in the Northeast. Our 4-bedroom house sat on 2 acres of meticulously landscaped property, a constant reminder of what hard work and determination could achieve. From an early age, it was clear that my parents had specific expectations for me and my younger brother, Travis. The family business was their legacy, and they fully intended for both of us to join it. Travis, 3 years my junior, embraced this destiny wholeheartedly. He spent weekends and summers working on construction sites from the time he was 16, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I was different. While I respected what my parents had built, I had my own passions. Where Travis saw buildings as projects to be managed and profits to be earned, I saw them as living, breathing spaces that could either inspire or constrain the people who used them. By the time I was in high school, I had developed an intense interest in sustainable architecture, dreaming of designing structures that worked in harmony with nature rather than against it. My father, though he never said it openly in front of my mother, seemed to understand my different perspective. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, he would sometimes find me sketching building designs in the home office. "You see the world differently, Jace," he told me once, his large hand resting on my shoulder. "That's not a weakness, it's a strength, if you know how to use it." Those quiet moments with my father were precious, but they were always overshadowed by my mother's not-so-subtle preference for Travis. Where my father saw potential in my divergent path, my mother saw only rebellion. She never missed an opportunity to compare us. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became a refrain I heard throughout my teenage years. Travis understands the value of family. He knows where his bread is buttered. Despite this tension, our family functioned relatively well until my sophomore year of college. I was 20, pursuing a degree in environmental design at the State University, when my father suffered a massive heart attack while overseeing a job site. He was only 52, and none of us saw it coming. One moment he was the robust, confident center of our family. The next, he was gone. My father's death changed everything. Without his balancing influence, my mother's controlling tendencies intensified. She expected me to drop out of school immediately and join the family business, helping Travis, who was only 19 at the time, learn the ropes. "Your father would want you to step up," she insisted at the funeral reception, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a knife. "This is what we've been preparing you for your entire life." I was drowning in grief, hardly able to process that my father was gone, let alone make major life decisions. I asked for time to finish my degree, promising to consider joining Anderson Construction afterward. My mother reluctantly agreed, but the resentment was already taking root. Over the next few years, a pattern emerged. Travis became the golden child, the one who had sacrificed his own educational aspirations to save the family business. I became the selfish one, pursuing my own interests, while my brother shouldered all the burden. The fact that I still came home during breaks and helped with the business's financial planning and sustainable initiatives didn't seem to matter. When I graduated with honors at 22, I faced the moment of truth. My mother organized a family dinner, clearly expecting me to announce my intention to join Anderson Construction full-time. Travis sat beside her, already serving as project manager despite his young age. I had spent weeks rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain that I had been accepted to a prestigious master's program in sustainable architecture. I believed I could eventually bring valuable new perspectives to the family business, but I needed to complete my education first. "I have something to announce," I said, once we'd finished the main course. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork. "I've been accepted to the graduate program at Pratt Institute. I want to specialize in sustainable design before I make any decisions about my future." The silence that followed was deafening. Travis stared at his plate, unwilling to meet my eyes. And my mother, her face flushing with anger, placed her napkin carefully beside her half-eaten piece of pie. "So you're abandoning us," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Your brother has been working 60-hour weeks since your father died, and you want to spend 2 more years playing with drawings and models?" "Mom, that's not fair," I protested. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I just think that with my specialized knowledge, I could eventually help Anderson Construction branch into sustainable building. That's where the industry is headed. Dad always said we needed to stay ahead of the curve." "Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted," she snapped, her composure cracking. "William built this company to provide for this family. He expected his sons to show some loyalty, not run off chasing fantasies." I looked to Travis for support, but he remained silent, eyes down. That night ended with me retreating to my room, heartsick, but still determined to follow the path I believed was right. I had no idea that worse was yet to come, that my mother's disappointment was about to transform into something much more destructive. 1 week after that tense family dinner, my mother called me down to the dining room again. I assumed it was to continue our discussion about my graduate school plans, perhaps to reach some kind of compromise. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I entered the room, I found my mother and Travis seated at the table with a man in a suit I recognized as Gerald Freeman, our family attorney since before I was born. A stack of documents sat in front of him. "Sit down, Jace," my mother said, her voice devoid of warmth. "We have important matters to discuss." I took a seat, anxiety crawling up my spine. Gerald nodded at me uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. "As you know, following your father's passing, Margaret inherited the family home and the majority stake in Anderson Construction," Gerald began. "She has asked me here today to witness some changes to her estate planning." My mother cut in, her eyes fixed on mine. "I've made a decision. Since you've made it clear that the family and its legacy mean nothing to you, I see no reason to include you in its future." My breath caught in my chest. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that the inheritance your father and I worked our entire lives to build will go to someone who appreciates its value. Travis will receive the family home and my controlling interest in Anderson Construction upon my death. You are being removed from my will entirely." The words hit me like physical blows. I looked at Travis, expecting to see at least some discomfort at this announcement, but his expression was carefully blank. "You can't be serious," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Dad would never have wanted this." "Your father isn't here," she replied coldly. "He's not here because the stress of building this business killed him. A business you're too good for, apparently." "This isn't about the business," I protested. "This is about education, about bringing new ideas that could help Anderson Construction grow. Dad always encouraged me to—" "Enough!" she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "You've always been selfish, Jace, always thinking you know better than everyone else. Your father coddled you, and look where that's gotten us." She stood up, drawing herself to her full height. "I want you out of this house. You have 48 hours to pack your things and leave. Since I'm not completely heartless, I won't throw you out with nothing. Gerald has prepared a certified check for $5,000. Consider that your severance package from this family." I sat there in stunned silence as Gerald slid an envelope across the table toward me. This couldn't be happening. My own mother was disowning me for wanting to further my education. "Mom, please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Let's talk about this rationally. You're angry right now, but—" "My decision is final," she interrupted. "Either accept it and leave peacefully, or I'll have your things put on the curb tomorrow morning." I looked at Travis again, silently pleading for him to say something, anything. He finally met my eyes, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw regret there. But then he looked away, and the moment passed. "Fine," I said, standing up so quickly my chair nearly toppled backward. "I'll be gone tomorrow." I left the room with whatever dignity I could muster, climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, and collapsed on my bed. For hours, I lay there, alternating between numbness and waves of grief that felt nearly as intense as when my father died. In one afternoon, I had lost my family, my home, and the security I had always taken for granted. The next day passed in a blur, as I packed my essential belongings into my used Honda Civic. Travis was mysteriously absent, probably at work or deliberately avoiding me. My mother stayed in her home office, door firmly closed. With nowhere else to go, I called my best friend from college, Allison Carter. She had an apartment in Brooklyn and immediately offered her couch while I figured out what to do next. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "This is insane, Jace. Your mom can't just throw you out because you want to go to grad school." But she had. And by that evening, I was driving south on I-95, my whole life reduced to whatever could fit in my car, tears blurring the road ahead of me. The next few weeks at Allison's apartment were some of the darkest of my life. I deferred my acceptance to the master's program, knowing I couldn't afford the tuition without family support. During the day, I half-heartedly looked for jobs that might use my undergraduate degree. At night, I lay awake on Allison's lumpy couch, replaying my mother's words in my mind, wondering if I had been selfish all along. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stopped calling friends back, let my appearance go, and spent days barely moving from the couch when Allison was at work. The $5,000 my mother had given me sat untouched in my account. Blood money I was too proud, but also too desperate to refuse. Just when I thought I had hit rock bottom, a certified letter arrived at Allison's apartment. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was some final paperwork from my mother cutting me off from family insurance or other lingering connections. Inside was a letter from a different law firm, one I didn't recognize. As I read the first paragraph, my hands began to shake. "Dear Mr. Anderson, in accordance with the instructions left by your late father, William Anderson, we are contacting you on the 3rd anniversary of his passing to inform you of a trust established in your name." I read the letter 3 times, not quite believing what it said. My father, without my mother's knowledge, had set up a small private account for me, containing $50,000 and some personal effects. The lawyer explained that my father had done this shortly after my 18th birthday, with specific instructions that I was to be notified only after his death and only if 3 years had passed. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note that had been sealed in a separate envelope within the trust documents. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. "Jace, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're making your own way in the world. I've always admired your independent spirit and your vision for what buildings could be. This money isn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it's enough to give you a start on whatever path you choose. Your mother and I built our legacy our way. Now it's time for you to build yours. Remember, a true legacy isn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in the lives you touch and the mark you leave on the world. I'm proud of you, son. Love, Dad." I broke down sobbing, clutching the letter to my chest. Even from beyond the grave, my father had found a way to support me, to let me know he believed in me. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The depression that had been suffocating me for weeks began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. My father had given me one last gift, not just of money, but of faith. I wouldn't waste it. The next morning, I accepted my deferred place in the master's program. I would use my father's money to pay for the first year of tuition and find a way to cover the rest. One way or another, I would build the legacy he believed I could create. Graduate school was both everything I'd hoped for and harder than I ever imagined. Pratt Institute's Master of Architecture program was rigorous, demanding, and exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who thought like me, who saw buildings not just as structures, but as living entities that could heal or harm the environments around them. The $50,000 from my father covered my first year's tuition with enough left over for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn. It was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls at once. But it was mine. More importantly, it was mine because of my father's belief in me, not my mother's charity. To cover living expenses and save for second-year tuition, I took on multiple jobs. During the day, I attended classes and studio sessions. Evenings, I worked at a cafe near campus. Weekends, I did drafting work for a small architectural firm that paid me under the table. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. Despite my grueling schedule, I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even me. Every project, every design, became a way of proving my mother wrong and my father right. I was not a failure. I was not selfish. I was building something valuable. In those early months, I made several attempts to reach out to my family. I sent Travis text messages that went unanswered. I called the house on holidays, only to have my mother hang up as soon as she heard my voice. Eventually, I stopped trying. The silence hurt, but it also hardened my resolve. I would succeed without them, despite them. As my first year of graduate school drew to a close, the program announced its annual Sustainable Design Competition. The winner would receive a $10,000 scholarship and an internship with a prominent green architecture firm. It was exactly what I needed to continue my education. For weeks, I poured every spare minute into my competition entry. My concept was a modular, affordable housing development that used passive solar design, rainwater harvesting, and communal green spaces to create a sustainable community. I called it Legacy Gardens, a private nod to my father's last message to me. The night before the submission deadline, I worked straight through until dawn, perfecting every detail of my presentation boards and digital models. When I finally printed the last rendering and mounted it on my display board, I collapsed into bed for a few hours of fitful sleep before the judging. The competition was held in the main gallery of the architecture building. 40 students had entered, their projects displayed around the perimeter of the room. The judges, a mix of faculty and visiting professionals, moved methodically from one project to the next, making notes and asking occasional questions. When they reached my display, I launched into my rehearsed presentation, explaining the philosophy behind Legacy Gardens and its practical applications. Most nodded politely, but one judge, an older man with silver hair and intense blue eyes, asked question after question, probing the depths of my thinking. "Your integration of community spaces with private dwellings is intriguing," he said finally. "Most young designers focus on either privacy or community, not the balance between them. Buildings should foster connections while respecting boundaries," I replied. "Just like families." The words came out before I could stop them, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. The silver-haired man gave me a curious look, but didn't press further. 3 days later, the program director called me into her office. I assumed it was to discuss my second-year funding, a conversation I'd been dreading. Instead, she handed me an envelope. "Congratulations, Jace. Your Legacy Gardens project won first place in the competition." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious?" She smiled. "Very. The judges were particularly impressed by the practicality of your design. Too many sustainable concepts never make it off the drawing board because they're too expensive or too idealistic to implement. Yours struck the perfect balance between innovation and feasibility. The scholarship money was a lifeline, ensuring I could continue my education, but the real prize turned out to be something else entirely." The following week, I received an email from Parker Williams, the silver-haired judge who had asked so many questions about my project. He wasn't just a guest judge, I learned, but the founder and CEO of Williams Sustainable Development, one of the most innovative green building companies on the East Coast. "Mr. Anderson," the email read, "your Legacy Gardens concept has stayed with me since the competition. I'd like to discuss it further, not just as a student project, but as a potential real-world development. Are you available for lunch this Friday?" I read the email a dozen times, certain there must be some mistake. Parker Williams wanted to meet with me? To discuss my project as something beyond a student exercise? It seemed too good to be true. Our lunch lasted 3 hours. Parker, as he insisted I call him, wasn't just interested in my designs. He was interested in my story. Somehow, I found myself telling him everything about my family, my father's death, my mother's rejection, and my determination to forge my own path. "You know," he said thoughtfully, as we finished our coffee, "I see a lot of myself in you. I also came from a family business, but wanted to build something different. My father thought I was throwing away my inheritance by focusing on sustainable development when traditional construction was more profitable." "What happened?" I asked. He smiled. 20 years later, Williams Sustainable Development is worth 3 times what my father's company was at its peak, and we're actually making the world better, not just making money. Sometimes the black sheep turns out to be the one with vision. As we parted, Parker made me an offer that would change everything. "I'd like to mentor you, Jace. More than that, I'd like to fund the development of Legacy Gardens as a real project once you graduate. Not just as a concept, but as an actual community. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? His answer was simple but profound. Because someone did it for me when I was your age. And because your design isn't just good architecture, it's good business. The market for sustainable housing is growing exponentially. Your concept could be the prototype for developments across the country. I left that meeting walking on air. For the first time since my mother had thrown me out, I felt like my dream wasn't just possible, but inevitable. What I didn't know then was that Parker's mentorship would lead to something far beyond my wildest imagination and bring me into direct confrontation with the family that had discarded me. Meanwhile, unknown to me, things at Anderson Construction were not going well. Travis, despite his dedication to the family business, lacked the innovation and vision that had made my father successful. The company was stagnating, taking on fewer and smaller projects. My mother, rather than acknowledging the problems, doubled down on traditional approaches, rejecting any suggestions for modernization or diversification. The stage was set for a collision that none of us could have anticipated, one that would force truths into the open and change all our lives forever. The next 18 months were a whirlwind of activity. With Parker's mentorship, my graduate studies took on new meaning. Every class, every project, became another step toward bringing Legacy Gardens to life. Parker arranged for me to intern at his firm during my second year, giving me hands-on experience with real-world sustainable development. What started as mentorship gradually evolved into a true partnership. Parker saw in me not just a promising student, but a future collaborator who shared his vision for how buildings could heal rather than harm the planet. By the time I was preparing for graduation, we had moved from theoretical discussions about Legacy Gardens to concrete planning. "I've been thinking," Parker said during one of our regular strategy sessions. "Instead of starting small with Legacy Gardens, what if we go big right out of the gate?" I looked at him questioningly. "What do you mean by big?" "I mean a full-scale development. Not just a few model homes, but an entire sustainable community. 20 to 30 houses, community spaces, the works." My heart raced at the thought, but reality quickly tempered my excitement. "That sounds amazing, but the land costs alone for something that size would be prohibitive, especially in any desirable area." Parker smiled, the expression I'd come to recognize as his, "I've already thought this through, look. What if I told you I know about a parcel of land that's about to come on the market? 20 acres, already zoned residential, in a prime location." "I'd say it sounds too good to be true," I replied. "Where is this magical property?" Parker slid a folder across the table to me. Inside was a real estate listing that hadn't been made public yet. As I read the address, I felt the blood drain from my face. "This is in Greenwich," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Less than 2 miles from my family's home." "Yes," Parker nodded. "The Wilsons are quietly looking to sell. They're moving to Florida and don't want their neighbors to know the property's available until they have a serious buyer lined up. I've known Jack Wilson for years, and he gave me a heads up." I stared at the listing, emotions warring inside me. The location was perfect for our project. Close enough to urban amenities to be desirable, but rural enough to allow for the kind of sustainable infrastructure we envisioned. Yet it was also within the orbit of my estranged family. The coincidence seemed almost cruel. "I don't know, Parker. Of all the places we could build, why there?" "2 reasons," he said, his tone turning serious. "First, practically speaking, the Greenwich market is exactly right for what we're trying to prove. High-end buyers who can afford the premium that sustainable features still command, but also environmentally conscious enough to value what we're offering." He paused, studying my face. "But second, and I'll be completely honest here, I think it would be powerful for you to build something remarkable in the shadow of the family that didn't believe in you." His directness startled me. We'd never explicitly discussed using Legacy Gardens as any kind of statement to my family. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said carefully. "Good. Revenge is petty and ultimately unfulfilling," Parker replied. "But there's something to be said for vindication, for proving, beyond any doubt, that your vision has merit. Not to hurt them, but to finally close that chapter of your life on your terms." I sat with that thought for several days, turning it over in my mind from every angle. Was building near my family home an act of defiance or healing? Would proximity to my past help me move forward or keep me tethered to old wounds? In the end, the practical advantages of the Wilson property won out. We made an offer, which was accepted within 24 hours. The deal was structured through a newly created LLC, with me as the primary architect, but my name kept out of the public documentation. It wasn't that I was hiding, exactly, but I wasn't ready to announce my return to Greenwich just yet. With land secured and my master's degree completed, Legacy Gardens transitioned from concept to reality at breathtaking speed. Parker's connections and reputation opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to a recent graduate working alone. Building permits were approved, contractors were hired, and ground was broken less than 3 months after we closed on the property. I threw myself into the project with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Every detail had to be perfect, from the orientation of each house, to maximize passive solar gain, to the community garden spaces, to the shared renewable energy systems. This wasn't just a development, it was my manifesto, in wood, glass, and steel. As the project took shape, word began to spread through Greenwich's affluent community. A mysterious new development was rising, one unlike anything the conservative town had seen before. The houses were modern but warm, constructed with sustainable materials but luxurious in their finishes. The landscape design preserved most of the existing trees, while adding edible gardens and natural water features that doubled as stormwater management. What really set Legacy Gardens apart, though, was its community aspect. Unlike typical luxury developments where privacy was paramount, we designed shared spaces that encouraged interaction. A central clubhouse used solar panels and a living roof. Community gardens provided fresh produce. Walking paths connected the homes without sacrificing security. At the heart of the development, on the highest point of the property, with views extending toward Long Island Sound, we designed the Showcase Home, the property that would eventually become mine. 3,000 square feet of cutting-edge sustainable design, it served as both our model home and the development statement piece. Throughout this period, I maintained my distance from my family. Greenwich wasn't so small that we'd inevitably cross paths, and I was too busy with the development to venture into my old neighborhood. Still, I found myself thinking about them more often. As Legacy Gardens took shape, had Travis stepped up to save Anderson Construction? Was my mother still as bitter as she'd been when she threw me out? Had they heard rumors about the innovative new development nearby? I got my answer 9 months into construction, when Parker called me with surprising news. "You won't believe who reached out about possibly doing the electrical work for phases 2 and 3 of Legacy Gardens," he said. "Anderson Construction." I nearly dropped my phone. "Are you serious? Did they know I'm involved?" "No," Parker replied. "The contact came through normal channels. Your brother Travis sent a very professional proposal, actually. Apparently, they're trying to expand into the green building sector." The irony was almost too perfect. The company that my mother had denied me a place in was now trying to work on my project, unaware of the connection. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "Nothing yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first. They're not the lowest bid, but they're competitive, and they do have a solid reputation despite their recent financial struggles." I found myself torn. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Anderson Construction. Another part saw an opportunity to help the company my father had built, even if my mother and brother had shut me out. But a third part, one I wasn't entirely proud of, was curious about what would happen when they inevitably discovered my involvement. "Tell them we'll consider their proposal," I decided finally, "but don't reveal anything about me." As Legacy Gardens neared completion, my mother's company wasn't the only one facing challenges. Through industry contacts, I began hearing troubling rumors about Anderson Construction. They had lost several major contracts. Longtime employees were leaving. They had even sold one of their warehouses, supposedly to free up capital. Most distressing of all was what I heard about my mother. According to mutual acquaintances, Margaret Anderson had become increasingly erratic in her business decisions, taking unnecessary risks and alienating loyal clients. She blamed Travis publicly for setbacks that were clearly her doing. The company my father had built with such care was faltering under her leadership. I considered reaching out, offering help, or at least a sympathetic ear. But every time I drafted an email or picked up my phone, I remembered her cold eyes as she disowned me. The wound was still too raw, the rejection too complete. Instead, I channeled my complex emotions into Legacy Gardens. As we prepared for our grand opening, I found myself wondering if my family would attend, if they would recognize my hand in the designs. Would they be proud, angry, or simply indifferent to what I had created? I was about to find out sooner than I expected, and in a way that none of us could have anticipated. 3 years after my mother disowned me, Legacy Gardens was nearing its official opening. 15 of the planned 28 homes were complete, with the remaining 13 under construction. We had pre-sold 22 units, exceeding even Parker's optimistic projections. The development had already been featured in Architectural Digest and Sustainable Living magazines. Though I had kept my name out of the spotlight, listed simply as lead architect in the press materials. I had moved into the showcase home 6 weeks earlier, relishing the opportunity to live in the space I had designed. To experience firsthand how the passive cooling worked during the summer heat, how the triple glazed windows kept the interior quiet, despite occasional construction noise, how the automated systems adjusted lighting and temperature based on occupancy. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October, one of those perfect New England fall days when the air is crisp and the sunlight seems to set the changing leaves on fire. I was working from home, finalizing plans for the community center that would anchor Phase 3, when I happened to glance out my front window. A black BMW was driving slowly down our private road, moving at the deliberate pace of someone taking in details rather than looking for a specific address. The car wasn't one I recognized from our construction crews or the few residents who had already moved in. I didn't think much of it at first. We had interested buyers touring the development almost daily, and the property was designed to be viewed at a leisurely pace. But when the car stopped directly in front of my house and sat idling for several minutes, curiosity got the better of me. Setting aside my laptop, I walked to the front door and stepped onto the wide porch that wrapped around the eastern and southern sides of the house, providing shade in summer and solar gain in winter. From this vantage point, I could see the driver more clearly through the windshield. My heart nearly stopped. It was Travis. He hadn't noticed me yet, too absorbed in staring at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read from this distance. After another moment, he turned off the engine and got out of the car, still not looking in my direction, as he pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of the property. I stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat inside or make my presence known. It had been 3 years since I'd seen my brother. 3 years of silence, of wondering if he ever thought about me, if he regretted not standing up for me that day in the dining room. Before I could decide, Travis turned and saw me. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the color drain from his face. He lowered his phone slowly, as if not quite believing what he was seeing. "Jace?" he called, his voice carrying across the manicured lawn. "Is that you?" Taking a deep breath, I stepped off the porch and walked toward him. 3 years had changed him. He looked older than his 25 years, with new lines around his eyes and mouth, his formerly athletic build now carrying an extra 15 pounds or so. "Hello, Travis," I said, stopping a few feet away from him. "It's been a while." He stared at me, then at the house, then back at me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Do you work on this development or something?" The fact that he didn't immediately connect me to the design of Legacy Gardens was somehow both amusing and painful. Had he really thought about me so little in the past 3 years that he couldn't see my aesthetic in every line of the building behind me? "Actually, I designed it," I said, keeping my voice even. "All of it. Legacy Gardens is my project." Travis's jaw literally dropped. "You're kidding," he said. "This is a multi-million-dollar development. How could you possibly be involved at that level? You were in school last I knew." "I graduated," I replied simply, "and I found investors who believed in my vision." He looked back at the house, really seeing it now. "This place is incredible," he admitted. "Everyone in Greenwich is talking about it. But wait, are you just working here? Or—" "I live here," I said, gesturing toward the house. "That's my home." Travis seemed unable to process this information. He walked a few steps past me, taking in the full view of the property, the extensive gardens, the solar array elegantly integrated into the roofline, the Tesla charger installed beside the garage. "This has to be worth." he began, then stopped, mentally calculating. Wait, there's no way you could afford this. Not on an architect's salary. Not right out of school. I'm not just the architect, I explained. I'm a partner in the development company. This is my house, Travis. I own it, along with a percentage of the entire Legacy Gardens project. He turned back to me, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching awe. That's not possible, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. How did you go from being kicked out with $5,000 to this in 3 years? It was a fair question, one that deserved a real answer. Why don't you come inside? I offered. I'll make some coffee and explain everything. He hesitated, then nodded, following me up the porch steps and into the home that represented everything I had accomplished since my family had written me off. The interior seemed to leave Travis speechless. The open floor plan flowed naturally from the entryway into the great room, with its wall of south-facing windows capturing the autumn sunlight. Reclaimed wood beams crossed the ceiling, contrasting with the modern lines of the furnishings below. Every detail, from the locally sourced stone fireplace to the handcrafted kitchen cabinets, reflected both luxury and sustainability. This is unbelievable, Travis finally said, as I handed him a cup of coffee in the kitchen. I mean, I knew you were into architecture, but this is world-class stuff, Jace. Thanks, I said, surprisingly touched by his genuine admiration. It's been a lot of work, but worth it. Over the next hour, I explained everything that had happened since that day in our family dining room. My depression after being kicked out, my father's secret trust, winning the design competition, meeting Parker, the vision for Legacy Gardens, and how we had brought it to life. Travis listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly absorbing the story of the brother he had lost touch with. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. I had no idea, he said quietly. All this time, Mom said you were probably struggling, maybe working at some small firm, too proud to ask for help. She made it sound like you'd made a huge mistake. And you believed her? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Travis had the grace to look ashamed. I tried to call you a few times, early on, he admitted. The number was disconnected, and with everything that was happening with the company, I just let it go. It was easier. What is happening with the company? I asked, genuinely curious. I've heard rumors that Anderson Construction isn't doing well. Travis's expression darkened. That's an understatement. We're on the verge of bankruptcy, Jace. Nothing has gone right since. He trailed off. Since Mom threw me out? I finished for him. He nodded reluctantly. She's made one bad decision after another. Rejected projects that would have been profitable. Alienated our best clients with her increasingly erratic behavior. When Dad was alive, she handled the books and the client relationships, and he managed the actual construction. After he died, she tried to do it all, and it's been a disaster. And where have you been in all this? I asked, not unkindly. Trying to keep things afloat while having virtually no authority, he sighed. She second-guesses every decision I make, countermands my orders to the crews, tells clients one thing while I'm telling them another. It's chaos. As he spoke, Travis pulled out his phone and began dialing. I have to tell Mom about this. She won't believe it. Before I could object, he had the phone to his ear. Mom? You won't believe who I just ran into at that new development everyone's talking about. He paused, listening. No, not a client. Jace, he's here. And Mom, this house is worth. Wait, you're not going to believe this. It's his. My brother's. He designed the whole development. I could hear my mother's raised voice from across the table, though I couldn't make out her words. Travis winced, holding the phone slightly away from his ear. Mom, calm down. You need to come see this. It's incredible. Jace has really accomplished something amazing here. Another pause. Fine, I'll text you the address. But you really should see this for yourself. He hung up, looking slightly embarrassed. She's coming over. Hope that's okay. It wasn't. Not really. But I found myself nodding anyway. Perhaps it was time to face my mother, to show her exactly what she had dismissed when she called me a failure. I just hadn't expected it to happen quite like this, or quite so soon. She'll be here in 20 minutes, Travis said, reading a text that had just come through. Jace, I don't know what she's going to say or do, but I want you to know that I'm really impressed by what you've accomplished here. And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you back then." His apology caught me off guard, its sincerity unmistakable. For 3 years, I had carried anger toward Travis for his silence, for his complicity in my exile. Now, seeing him in person, hearing the strain in his voice as he described the deteriorating situation at Anderson Construction, that anger began to soften around the edges. "Let's just see how this goes," I said, not quite ready to offer forgiveness, but no longer burning with resentment either. My mother made her choice 3 years ago. Now she can see the consequences of that choice firsthand. What neither of us could have anticipated was just how explosive that confrontation would be, or the shocking revelations it would bring to light. 23 minutes after Travis's call, a silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway with enough speed to send gravel flying. My mother emerged from the driver's seat like a storm front, her face set in the same disapproving lines I remembered from 3 years ago. Time had not softened her. If anything, the past 3 years seemed to have hardened her features further. She marched up the walkway, barely glancing at the architectural features that most visitors pause to admire. Travis met her at the front door, visibly tense as he ushered her inside. I remained in the great room, standing near the fireplace, determined to meet her on my terms, in the home I had created. When she entered the room, her eyes swept past me initially, taking in the soaring ceilings, the wall of windows, the evident quality of every finish and fixture. Then her gaze locked onto me, and for an instant, something flickered across her face. Surprise? Recognition? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced by the cold mask I knew too well. "So," she said, her voice clipped, "this is what you've been doing, while your family's company struggles, playing with fancy buildings. No hello. No acknowledgement of the 3-year separation. No recognition of what I had accomplished. Just an immediate attack. Some things never changed." "Hello, Mother," I replied evenly. "Welcome to my home." "Your home?" she scoffed, looking around again. "There's no way you could afford a place like this. What did you do? Charm some wealthy investor? Always taking shortcuts instead of putting in the hard work." Travis stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, that's not fair. Jace designed this entire development. He's a partner in the company building it. He's done amazingly well." "Partner?" she repeated, her voice rising. "That's ridiculous. He's barely out of school. Who would make him a partner in a multi-million-dollar development? He must have done something underhanded. Maybe even illegal." Her accusation hung in the air, so outrageous that for a moment I couldn't even respond. Travis looked mortified. "Mom, stop," he said firmly. "You haven't seen Jace in 3 years. You don't know what he's capable of." "I know exactly what he's capable of," she snapped. "Abandoning his family, putting his selfish interests above everyone else's. And now what? We're supposed to be impressed that he's playing architect while the business your father built crumbles?" The mention of my father ignited something in me. "My father would have been proud of what I've built here," I said, my voice quiet but intense. "He always supported my interest in sustainable design. He's the reason I was able to start over after you threw me out." My mother's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I explained about the trust my father had established, the $50,000 and personal note that had arrived when I was at my lowest point. "He went behind my back?" she said, her face flushing with anger. "Set up a secret account for you without telling me? That's just like William, always indulging your fantasies." "Dad believed in me," I replied simply. "He knew I had something valuable to contribute, even if it wasn't what you wanted." "And look where his belief got our family business," she retorted. "Nearly bankrupt, losing clients left and right, all because you weren't there to help when we needed you." Travis made a sound of disbelief. "Mom, you can't seriously blame the company's problems on Jace. He didn't want to leave. You kicked him out." She rounded on Travis. "Whose side are you on? After everything I've done to keep the company going? To secure your inheritance? I gave you the house, the business, everything, and this is the thanks I get?" As they argued, I noticed my mother's purse on the entryway table, where she had dropped it upon entering. The clasp had come undone, and several papers were visible inside. One caught my eye specifically because I recognized the letterhead of Coastal Development Group, one of Anderson Construction's longtime competitors. Without thinking, I moved toward the purse. "What are you doing with coastal development paperwork?" I asked, gesturing toward the visible documents. My mother lunged for the purse, but not before Travis had seen what I was pointing at. He reached it first, pulling out the papers despite our mother's protests. "These are sale contracts," he said slowly, scanning the documents, "for the family home, and transfer of ownership papers for Anderson Construction." He looked up, his face draining of color. "You're selling the house and the company to Coastal? Without telling me?" My mother snatched the papers back. "I don't have to tell you anything. I'm still the majority owner. Those assets are mine to dispose of as I see fit." "But you promised me the house," Travis said, his voice hollow with shock. "You said Anderson Construction would be mine when you retired. That was the whole point of me sacrificing everything to help run it after Dad died." "Plans change," she said dismissively. "The company is worth more to Coastal as an acquisition than it ever will be under your management. The debts are too high, the client list too depleted. This is the only way to salvage anything from the mess." Travis seemed unable to process what he was hearing. "The mess? Mom, you're the one who has been making all the decisions for the past 3 years. I've tried to implement changes, to modernize our approaches, but you've shut down every suggestion, because your ideas were impractical. Just like your brother's fantasies about sustainable building," she snapped. I laughed, the sound sharp in the tense room. "Impractical? Mother, look around you. This fantasy has become a 28-home development that's already turning a profit. We've pre-sold nearly 80% of the units at prices well above market average. There's nothing impractical about it." Something shifted in Travis's expression as he looked from me to our mother, then back again. "She was wrong about you," he said softly. "Which means she might be wrong about me too. About a lot of things." He turned back to our mother. "I want to see the company books. All of them. Not just the summaries you've been showing me." "That's none of your concern," she replied, her voice suddenly guarded. "It is if you're selling the company I've been working 70-hour weeks to save," Travis insisted. "I have a right to know exactly what's happening." An uncomfortable silence fell. My mother glanced toward the door, clearly calculating whether she could simply leave and end this confrontation. But Travis blocked her path, his expression set in lines of determination I had never seen from him before. "Fine," she said finally. "The books are in my home office. We can go there now." "No," Travis replied firmly. "I want to see them here. Go home and get them, or give me the key to your filing cabinet, and I'll get them myself." For a long moment, they stared at each other in a silent battle of wills. Then, to my surprise, my mother relented. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, gathering her purse and the scattered papers. "This is completely unnecessary, but if it will put an end to this ridiculous drama, fine." After she left, Travis sank onto my sofa, running his hands through his hair. I can't believe she was going to sell everything without telling me. After all the promises, all the sacrifices. "I can believe it," I said, sitting across from him. "But what I don't understand is why. The Margaret Anderson I knew was ruthlessly devoted to the family business. She would never sell it unless..." "Unless what?" Travis prompted when I trailed off. "Unless there was something she didn't want anyone to see," I finished. "Travis, how much do you actually know about the company's finances?" He frowned. "Less than I should, apparently. Mom has always handled the books, even when Dad was alive. She gives me operating budgets for projects, but I've never had access to the full financial picture." A suspicion was forming in my mind, one I didn't want to voice without evidence. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait long. True to her word, my mother returned in just under an hour, carrying a laptop and several file folders. "Here," she said, dropping the materials on my coffee table. "See for yourself. The company is failing, and selling is the only option." Travis immediately opened the laptop, navigating to the accounting software while I examined the physical files. We worked in silence for several minutes, cross-referencing project budgets with actual expenditures, comparing client payments with bank deposits. The discrepancies were impossible to miss once we knew to look for them. Large sums moving between accounts without clear purpose. Payments to vendors that didn't match our actual materials costs. Transfers to offshore accounts, listed vaguely as consulting fees. "Mom," Travis said slowly, looking up from the screen, Where did the money from the Wilson warehouse sale go? It's not in any of the company accounts. My mother's face remained impassive. It went to cover operating expenses. $600,000 in operating expenses that don't appear anywhere in these records? I asked, pointing to the discrepancy in the files I'd been reviewing. You've been embezzling from the company, Travis said, his voice flat with shock. For how long? Since Dad died? That's absurd, she replied, but her denial lacked conviction. I've been keeping the company afloat while you bungled one project after another. No. You've been bleeding it dry, Travis countered, his voice rising as he continued to scroll through the financial records, and blaming me for the shortfalls. The Miller project didn't fail because I ordered the wrong materials. It failed because you diverted 40% of the budget to your personal account. My mother's composure finally cracked. You have no idea the pressure I've been under, she said, her voice shaking. William left me with a company I never wanted to run and a son who wasn't ready to take over. What was I supposed to do? Not steal from the business Dad spent his life building, I replied, disgust filling me. Not lie to Travis about his performance when you were the one sabotaging projects. Not sell the family home out from under him after promising it to him. Travis turned to me, a new realization dawning on his face. You knew about this, didn't you? That's why you weren't surprised by the sale contracts. I nodded slowly. I suspected something was wrong. In the development world, word gets around. I've heard rumors about Anderson Construction's financial problems for months. The timeline never made sense to me. Dad left the company in excellent shape. Even with some adjustment difficulties after his death, it shouldn't have declined so rapidly. So you knew Mom was stealing and didn't tell me? Travis asked, hurt evident in his voice. I knew something was wrong, I corrected, but I had no proof and no right to interfere after being cut off. Besides, would you have believed me if I'd reached out with accusations about Mom after 3 years of silence? Travis considered this, then shook his head. Probably not, he admitted. I would have thought you were bitter and making trouble. He turned back to our mother. How could you do this, Mom? To the company? To me? To both of us? For the first time since I could remember, my mother looked genuinely defeated. She sank into a chair, suddenly appearing much older than her 55 years. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she said quietly. After your father died, I panicked. The business was always his passion, not mine. I just did the books, managed the office. I never wanted to run a construction company. Then why not let Travis and me take over? I asked. Between my design skills and his project management experience, we could have made it work. She laughed bitterly. You think it was that simple? William built that company on his personality, his relationships. Clients stayed loyal because of him. When he died, I knew it was just a matter of time before everything fell apart. So you decided to dismantle it yourself? Travis asked incredulously. Take what you could before it collapsed? I decided to secure my future, she corrected. The money I moved was my insurance policy. And it would have worked perfectly if you hadn't come back, she added, glaring at me. The room fell silent as the full impact of her admission settled over us. My mother, the woman who had preached family loyalty my entire life, had betrayed not just me but Travis and my father's legacy as well. It was almost too much to comprehend. What happens now? Travis finally asked, looking between my mother and me. It was a good question, one that would determine not just the fate of Anderson Construction, but the future of our fractured family as well. The three of us sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my mother's betrayal and the proof of my success. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. For long moments, none of us spoke, each processing the revelations in our own way. Finally, I broke the silence. The way I see it, we have two options, I said, looking directly at my mother. We can make this public, report the embezzlement to the authorities, and let the legal system decide your fate. Or we can find another solution, one that salvages what's left of Anderson Construction and gives all of us a chance to move forward. You would send your own mother to prison? She asked, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. After what you did to me? To Travis? To Dad's legacy? I countered. I'm offering an alternative, but don't mistake that for forgiveness. Travis leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. What kind of alternative are you thinking, Jace? I had been considering this since the truth had begun to emerge. First, the sale to Coastal Development stops immediately. Second, Mom returns the money she diverted from the company, all of it. Third, she steps away from Anderson Construction completely. My mother started to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. In exchange, we don't go public with what happened. Mom can retire quietly, save face in the community, and Travis and I will take over the company together, rebuilding it the way Dad would have wanted. Together? Travis repeated, surprise evident in his voice. You'd come back to Anderson Construction after everything that happened? I smiled slightly. Not exactly come back. More like bring Anderson Construction into the future. I gestured around my home, at the development beyond the windows. What I've learned, what I've built here, it's exactly what Dad's company needs. Sustainable construction is the future, and Legacy Gardens proves it can be profitable. You're proposing a merger, Travis said slowly, understanding dawning on his face. I'm proposing a partnership, I corrected, between brothers, between your construction expertise and my design vision. The kind of partnership Dad always hoped we'd have. Travis nodded, clearly warming to the idea. Anderson Sustainable Development, he mused. It has a nice ring to it. We both turned to our mother, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange. And what about me? She finally asked. You're just cutting me out of everything? You cut me out 3 years ago, I reminded her. The difference is, I'm offering you a dignified exit. Keep the house if you want, though I think you should honor the promise you made to Travis. Take enough money for a comfortable retirement. But the company, the legacy, that belongs to Dad's sons now. She looked as if she might argue further, but something in our united front must have finally penetrated her defenses. I didn't do it because I was greedy, she said softly. An admission I never expected to hear from her. I did it because I was afraid. After William died, I felt so lost. The business was slipping away. You were leaving, she said, looking at me, and I couldn't bear the thought of failing completely. So you called me a failure instead, I said. Kicked me out. Gave everything to Travis with promises you never intended to keep. I was wrong, she whispered, the words clearly difficult for her to say. About you. About what you were capable of. It wasn't quite an apology. But from Margaret Anderson, it was as close as one might ever get. The admission seemed to deflate her, stripping away the armor of righteousness she had worn for as long as I could remember. Travis reached across the coffee table and took her hand. Mom, it's not too late to make this right. Return the money, step back, and let Jace and me salvage what's left of the company. We can still honor Dad's memory, just in a different way than any of us expected. For several long moments, she sat silently, looking between us. I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes, weighing options, considering escapes. But in the end, perhaps she simply ran out of fight. All right, she said finally. I'll return the money. All of it. And I'll sign over my ownership shares to both of you, equally. Relief washed over me, not because I had won some victory over my mother, but because a path forward had opened, one that might actually heal our family rather than destroy it completely. Over the next several weeks, a complex dance of legal and financial maneuvers took place. My mother, true to her word, returned the embezzled funds, nearly $2 million in total. The sale to Coastal Development was canceled, with a story circulated about Margaret Anderson deciding to keep the company in the family after all. Travis moved into my guest house temporarily while we sorted out the housing situation. He ultimately decided to sell the family home, using his half of the proceeds to invest in our newly formed company and purchase a smaller house near Legacy Gardens. My mother, in a surprising turn, chose to move to a condominium in Boston, closer to her sister, whom she had rarely visited while married to my father. The new Anderson Sustainable Development Company emerged from the ashes of the old. We retained the best of the original company's employees, adding expertise in green building techniques and materials. Travis's project management skills complemented my design vision perfectly, just as I had hoped. Our first joint project was finishing the final phase of Legacy Gardens, with Anderson Sustainable Development serving as the general contractor. Seeing Travis direct crews in bringing my designs to life felt like the closing of a circle that had been broken for too long. My mother's role in our lives shifted dramatically. She wasn't present for day-to-day operations, but slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding some semblance of a family relationship. Monthly dinners, occasional phone calls. The anger and resentment didn't vanish overnight, but they began to lose their sharp edges. 6 months after that fateful confrontation in my living room, we gathered for the grand opening of the Legacy Gardens Community Center. The building, with its living roof and passive solar design, stood as a testament to everything I had learned and created since being cast out of my family. As we prepared to cut the ceremonial ribbon, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us all to this moment. My father's secret gift had been the seed, but what had grown from it was something I had built myself, something no one could ever take away from me. Parker joined us for the ceremony, beaming with pride as local officials and media praised the innovative development. "Your father would have been proud," he told me quietly, as we watched Travis charming reporters with details of our new company's green initiatives. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing," I replied, fingering the worn note from my father that I still carried in my wallet. When he set up that trust, when he encouraged me to follow my own path, he was playing the long game. The afternoon was a blur of congratulations and tours, potential clients eager to discuss future projects with our new company. Through it all, I kept catching glimpses of my mother, standing slightly apart from the crowds, observing everything with an expression I couldn't quite read. As the event wound down, she approached me, her posture stiff, but her eyes softer than I had seen them in years. "You've built something remarkable here, Jace," she said, gesturing at the development around us. "Something lasting." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the genuine pride in her voice. "That means a lot." "I was wrong about you," she continued, her words coming with visible effort. "When I called you selfish, when I said you were abandoning the family, you weren't rejecting your father's legacy. You were building on it, in your own way." "I never wanted to reject anything about Dad," I said honestly. "I just needed to find my own path." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "William always said you had his vision. I was too stubborn to see it until now. It wasn't a complete healing of all that had broken between us. That would take more time, more conversations, more small steps toward understanding. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which something new might be built." Later that evening, as Travis and I sat on my back deck watching the sunset over Legacy Gardens, he raised his glass in a toast. "To Dad," he said, "for believing in both of us, even when we couldn't believe in each other. And to new beginnings," I added, clinking my glass against his, "built on our own terms." The path that had brought me here was not one I would have chosen. Being cast out, called a failure, losing my family for 3 long years had been excruciating. But standing on the other side, I could see how those painful experiences had forged me into someone stronger, more determined, more capable than I might otherwise have become. Sometimes, the greatest inheritances aren't the ones that are given to us, but the ones we create for ourselves. My father hadn't left me a house or a company. He had left me something far more valuable, the belief that I could build my own legacy, one that honored his memory while remaining true to my own vision. And in the end, that belief had brought me not just success, but something I had thought lost forever, a chance to heal my family, to rebuild what had been broken, to find reconciliation where I had expected only continued estrangement. As the light faded from the sky, casting long shadows across the sustainable community I had dreamed into existence, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. Not the bitter triumph of proving my mother wrong, but the deeper satisfaction of knowing I had stayed true to myself through every challenge and emerged stronger for it. Legacy, I had learned, wasn't about buildings or bank accounts or even family names. It was about the lives we touch, the positive changes we create in the world, and the courage to follow our own path, even when those closest to us cannot see where it leads. My father had understood that all along. Now, finally, so did I. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own dreams? What would you have done in Jace's situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that following their own path isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most courageous thing they can do. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes what looks like failure is just the first step toward building something even more beautiful than you imagined.